At our first Global Mobility Roundtable, I brought together a group of expert advisors to discuss the latest tax, legal, investment, education and insurance considerations for those relocating to or from the UK. Of course, the key focus was the trends we've seen in global mobility throughout the COVID-19 pandemic and what we can expect to see over the next year. We also explored the rise in working from home and the impact it's had on international travel. Watch the full recording now and be sure to get in touch for more information on how these factors may impact you and the opportunities available. Welcome everyone. This is Buzzercott's first roundtable on global mobility. All of you know, but my name is David Conway. I'm Associate Director, Buzzercott. I'm joined by Rakesh, who most of you know, Director within Buzzercott. I think really the purpose of this roundtable really is just to have a fairly informal chat around the area of global mobility, perhaps focusing, maybe looking back on how the interesting, to say the least, last 16 months or so has been, particularly with regards to global mobility and how it's changed things, what patterns you're seeing, and how, sort of looking to the future, how you all think the area of global mobility is going to change, what challenges they're going to present, and what opportunities for us all as well. I have a list of points and questions that I sent all of you a while back. That's really a sort of a guide just to help focus the discussion. It might be that we sort of go off into a completely different direction, and that's great as well. But I think maybe first of all, Paul is here. Hello, Paul. I think first of all, perhaps if we just go around the table, everyone introduce themselves, where they're from, just very briefly, what you guys do. I know obviously we've had some coffee and croissants, so people have got to know each other a little bit, and then we'll go to the people on the screen as well. So perhaps if you can start.
Yeah. So I'm Stephen Hall. I work for a law firm called Armstrong Teasdale. We were previously called Carmen & Co, so we got taken over by a US firm based in St. Louis, and we specialise in UK inbound, so any country to the UK visas, and then any country to the US and also to Ireland, and it's a mix of corporate clients and private clients. So we can do both.
Great. So Chris.
Hi, my name is Chris. I'm a private banker at Standard Chartered Private Bank based here in London. As a private bank, we look after high net worth and ultra high net worth clients across Asia, Africa, and the Middle East, which is our footprint. I focus on Middle East clients, more specifically the Gulf, and I have a mix of clients who are resident in the Middle East and clients who are UK resident non-domicile. And therefore, I look after that corridor also of clients who move back and forth.
Rahul Batra, I'm the managing partner at Hudson Mackenzie. We are a full-service law firm, but my specialism lies in immigration. And we do both UK inbound and outbound immigration across the world, 250 countries nearly. Our business is split into two models. First is the corporate immigration model, which is we help companies with their work permits and visas. But what we also help is the high net worths and the ultra high net worths with the citizenship programs and those golden visas across the world. I'm here to discuss all these changes which are coming up and see how we could potentially work together and make things happen in a better way.
Okay. My name is Richard Northey. I'm the Managing Director of The Education Consultancy. I work with British and international families who are looking for schools in the UK, from pregnant mums up to 18-year-olds. So I work with families in the UK, families moving to the UK, and people looking for boarding schools in the UK.
I'm Eric Major. I'm the CEO of a company called Latitude. 27 years in this investment migration space, golden visa world, basically. We offer services in over 30 countries, including where it all started in my homeland of Canada with the Immigrant Investor Program, but the Tier 1 investor, Tier 1 innovator, golden visas and Portugal, Ireland, and Spain and everything in between. Also citizenship by investment. So well-developed private client service capability in over 18 countries, including Vietnam. And a government advisory team of 5 of us who've had the privilege over a few decades of actually creating or assisting government in creating policy in this space. My past life at Henley, we were responsible for launching the Malta Citizenship Program, Antigua, in St. Kitts, here with the Home Office in 2004, with the investor category back then. So we also have that capability of speaking with governments, and that will be very busy next few years, I suspect, with COVID and the opportunities for government to raise capital this way.
Right, Michael?
Hi, my name's Michael Smethurst. I work for a company called Atlas Life. Atlas are a specialist insurance solutions provider. We generally work with clients that are unable to find the relevant life insurance product in the local market. So that might be due to capacity, residence, or currency issues. Although we're not directly involved in citizenship or residence, we do generally tend to get clients who have moved or are thinking about moving to a location. So yeah, I'm based in Asia. As you've already touched on, I'm based in Vietnam. So yeah, happy to be here, and thanks for the invite.
That's a pleasure. And Paul, did you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, so I'm Paul Baker, Associate Director at Buzzercot. I'm a dual qualified US-UK tax advisor working in the expat tax services team. So my clients predominantly comprise of US citizens living or moving to and from the UK. As a team, we have around 55 dual qualified US-UK tax professionals and prepare around 1,600 US and 1,200 UK returns a year. We're an active member of Farm Global, which is an international association of independent accountancy firms. So we have 300 firms. They have 350 firms in over 80 countries. So we're reaching out for home country tax advice. We have an active network there. And as you're no doubt aware through conversations with David, our global mobility team are able to offer a whole range of tax-related services, including US and UK tax compliance, payroll services, arrival and departure planning, tax planning, such as overseas work days relief, HR services, and everything else that goes with that.
That's certainly what we try and do, isn't it? So I suppose just sort of moving on to the general conversation, the first thing I identified is maybe just to look back at the last 16 months with regards to people who are looking to permanently relocate to another country. Obviously, the conditions have hardly been ideal in that regard. There's been times where we've barely been allowed to go outside our house, let alone relocate to another country. But certainly people had plans. Certainly people had plans in 2019. A lot of my clients did, and we did some good tax planning for them to then move in 2020, only for obviously events to get in the way of such plans. But just sort of maybe looking perhaps at your target markets. Have there been changes in your target markets? Have the overall numbers of inquiries changed? Have there been changes in the countries that people are seeking to leave or countries that people are seeking to relocate to? And what have been motivations for such moves? Who wants to start off?
Chris, do you want to start? Because you've dealt with the Middle Eastern side of things.
Yes.
And African, and obviously I work a lot in the African and Middle Eastern market, and there's been a lot of movement. As you know, with the West African clients, they tend to want to talk about death. It's a taboo subject culturally. So I know some of them, when we talk about death, we don't use the word death, we call it Rakesh planning or whatever, some other name that we know means death, but isn't death. We certainly see a lot of interest from West Africa and East Africa, Kenya, Uganda, as people fear COVID. There's a real fear of COVID. And now, you know, the West Africans and Nigerians are always thinking, you know, I'll live forever, I'm never going to die, I'm never going to plan for succession, I don't even want to talk about it. That has changed dramatically in the last 18 months. They're now all talking about succession planning, looking at the structures and going, hey, what do I do for the next generation? A lot of these have businesses in Nigeria, and the kids don't want to take it over, so they're off to go to university in America, they're off to university in the UK. Are you seeing a similar sort of pattern?
Yes, and I completely agree to your point of the pandemic has helped people make decisions. I think it's brought things forward. In terms of mobility, for example, people that were thinking about moving to the UK have actually made the decision to do so, because what's been going on in the Middle East, the situation in some countries has been quite fluid. I take Lebanon as an example, where I've had quite a few inquiries of people wanting to move to the UK from there. They've had an economic financial crisis. There was the terrible explosion last year, and added to that, the COVID pandemic. It's made the UK look like, well, I think things, we don't always see it this way sitting here, but as being pretty well managed. And when they start thinking about their future, their children's education, their plans, I have found that the spirit of time has it's been easier to bring in other advisors such as yourselves, because people have been sitting at home, and it's been easier to get them on a Zoom call. I know that we've had meetings this way, Richard, and it's been a lot easier to get to get the clients together with their advisors, whereas before we would have had to wait for everybody to be in London at the right time. So in a way, it's been an easier way. It's been an easier way to plan things ahead, I find. I don't know if anybody around the table has had a similar experience.
Exactly the same. Finally, people have the time. You know, in the private bank world and the advisory world, these are successful, busy entrepreneurs and with global empires, and just nailing them down to talk about something important to them, but they just don't necessarily have the time. We saw this in other crises. I remember in '97 with the financial crisis in Asia, all of a sudden we had clients taking the time to fill out forms, because that's in the end what we do. We fill out forms. But before we get there, we explain the landscape. So they had time to tell me about Portugal, tell me about Ireland, tell me about UK, and walk them through it and initiate it. So we saw at least a doubling of our inquiries over the last 16 months. What's new I would never have thought in the space that I occupy, this investment migration space, which traditionally the source countries, China, then the Middle East, then Russia, then Vietnam, and those were the source markets, and they still are. But my number one source market in the last 12 months has been America, United States. So Americans got rattled over this, probably more than just COVID. They've had a really bumpy last 4 years. And they, not necessarily packing their bags and moving quite yet. Some are prepared to, but most of them just want that plan B, just like the guy in Shanghai does, just like the guy in Ho Chi Minh does, just like the guy in Nigeria does. Right? That plan B. They're not necessarily going to move overnight. A lot of these programs are not so taxing on the physical day count anymore. UK still is. UK is a proper migration, you're moving kind of destination. Portugal isn't like that. Ireland's not like that. Malta's not like that, and Spain as well. And so Italy, a newcomer as well. So yeah, it's more inquiries, more discussions, more time, new markets. We haven't really, I know this is around the corner, Brits wanting to reclaim their EU privileges, haven't really had to think about it because COVID just had everyone hunker down, not move around. But some of them are realized, you know what, if I want to be in that lovely house in the south of France or Spain that I bought in my retirement years, they're going to need a visa to hang out there. They'll be allowed to visit. They won't be allowed to stay more than 90 days, right? They'll need their visa. So that market's going to wake up, and we've had inquiries around that, but I foresee the British market as well looking at these things.
So Eric, on the US side, I've had a lot of things said out there. A lot of people move from New York down to Miami and Tampa. My brother-in-law lives in Tampa, and he just goes, the house prices around Tampa have just gone astronomical because everyone's moving out of New York because of the proposed tax changes coming through.
Indeed.
That's been one of the driving forces that I've heard quite a lot. And the other thing is the way the Americans dealt with the COVID pandemic compared to and how we in the UK, and we know we've got issues here, we've been locked down and all the challenges that bring. But to be fair, if you look at the outside world, we've actually been quite good in getting the vaccinations. We've been one of the leaders, which is why we've probably seen immigration coming here over time. But is the US tax issues causing the major issue with the changes that Biden's planning to bring in? And then I'll bring Paul in, obviously Paul's the expert.
I think, yeah, I'm interested in Paul's work because we've had, like I said, it's our number one source market right now. Some of them certainly have looked at the UK, so you got to get into the whole res non-dom discussion, and of course they still have to file with Uncle Sam because they're not renouncing quite yet. Some of them are thinking renouncing, but they know it's a long-term journey. Of course, they want another grade A passport. UK is going to take them 6 years to get it, so they start looking at countries like Malta and Austria where we could facilitate that. So that's sort of like a multi-pronged discussion with Americans. But the drivers stem beyond the whole tax Biden story. It really does stem from the, going back a year ago in DC, we had a lot of people from Washington, DC, and the whole security and the whole demonstrations there, and some people realized it was going a little bit tumultuous, and they would say, well, tell me more about this St. Kitts thing, and maybe I could do work from there off the beach there with my laptop, because I realized that I don't need to be at the towers of Manhattan to do my work. I could do it from anywhere. And so we had a lot of lifestyle inquiries that led them to acquiring citizenship in the Caribbean, for example, thinking, okay, and if the world does change around, yeah, I could go there. But top capital, the top guys, and I'm talking the pioneers of Silicon Valley, those guys are looking at 5 to 10 year, like, how do I map this out? Because they're not very rosy on the decade ahead if you speak to them.
And Paul, how have you found the US market in the last year or so?
So, I mean, if you go back to the start of the pandemic, I mean, when most of the start of the pandemic, I suppose, but the first 6 months or so of the pandemic, we didn't see, there was a downturn initially, but then certainly since probably last August time, over the last 12 months, there's been a marked uptake in, with the advent of remote work, and it's people, who, as you said, people used to go traveling to New York are now not traveling and they're working from a different state. Or they're giving up the US entirely and looking to move over to the UK. And both of them do present the challenges, both from a state perspective and a state tax perspective and just a global perspective. Because, just looking at the people who are moving from or have been living in one state and then commuting to another state, if they're now living and working from home, the state where they're working is no longer getting their tax automatically, the state tax. So there's been a lot of changes at state level, and talk of nexus and working out who should have which state gets the right the tax rates on income. But in terms of actual people, moving over to the UK, similar to what you're saying, we're not seeing that much movement to the UK at the moment, but there's a lot of new inquiries coming through about moves further down the line, 12 months. And it's just, as you say, it's that plan B, that option to move over to the UK. And then again, looking at, people wanting to, you get the extreme where people wanting to leave the US and give up their citizenship as soon as possible, have announced their citizenship. And in order to do that in the UK, you've got to acquire residence in the UK and have acquire citizenship in the UK in order to, if you're living here and want to give up your US citizenship, because you do have to have citizenship in another country. So there's certainly been an uptick in the past few months, and yeah, it's definitely more the plan B option at the moment, and I have been doing a lot of advisory work around what would be the tax implications of moving. There is a lot of uncertainty at the moment with regard to the Biden proposals and what they're going to mean, and whether they are actually going to pass. There's a lot of negotiation between the houses at the moment in the background, and it's actually quite a difficult environment for advisors and clients at the moment, is because we don't know where it's going to end up. We know income tax rates are going up to 39.6, but there's a lot of negotiation about deductions, charitable exemptions, the corporate rate tax, and the very very important decisions to make, but without having the certainty of where those tax rates are going to end up, it's very difficult to advise clients in this area at the moment from a tax perspective.
It's really a waiting and seeing.
But Paul, it's also the fact that whatever the US decides to do will give a green light to the UK to do various things. So if the US increases CGT rates, the UK will go, well, we can increase them now because the US have done it. We're on a level playing field and we'll go ahead. Are you seeing some of those conversations in the clients that you speak around?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I echo Eric's comments earlier. It's such a moving piece ever since Brexit and COVID have happened. Everybody's thinking, US was in a turmoil for God knows so many years, for so many reasons, not just Biden or Trump or whatever. But the political environment was so uncertain, and people were like ringing constantly saying, "What can we do?" Just forward planning. Can we move to Malta? Can we move to Ireland? Because a lot of Americans have Irish roots.
Yes, they do.
And Ireland was one of the biggest inquiries we had from US nationals, and people were looking to see if we have any roots in Germany or Ireland where we can try and get citizenship through that route without having to invest money. So I think we live in a world where it's all about lifestyle. Mm-hmm. It's all about, okay, let's step back and see. We don't want to work in big offices because let's accept we are not going back to offices anytime. No. It's gone. These buildings will be converted into apartments or something else. We are going to stay in home forever. Let's accept that. And people have realized that and said, you know what, this is the new normal. Why don't we look at, okay, work in this country or, work in a remote island where we can have a lifestyle, life.
This wasn't Barbados pitching over here saying, come and work in Barbados remotely.
Exactly.
And you can work from there, right?
Digital nomad.
Digital nomad.
They're all popping up every week.
UAE is offering golden visas now for people.
So the fintech guys are more, I know there's quite a lot of fintech guys that I act for. And a lot of them talk about going to places like Thailand and Dubai and various, they go, I don't need to be here. No. I do everything from my computer screen. I can do that wherever I am. Why do I need to be here? And everyone, all my sort of team are at home. So I've given up the office space. And a lot of these gave up the office space just before COVID kind of really kicked the saw it. Yeah. So they've kind of fattened up their business, their model, because they haven't have to pay the office fees and the rest that come with it. They've got all their team working home, working efficiently, and probably working harder. And we were talking about this earlier on. We have actually, the people that have been working home have actually been working hard because the 2 hours of commute that they've normally would face, they're now actually using that time to spend time with family, which is very important, but also doing that additional bit of work here and there. And I think we've seen productivity definitely increase.
Yeah.
And our workload increase. So I think it's all positive from that perspective. There are still some employers out there who want the teams to come back 5 days a week, and there will always be those employers. But I think it's about finding the balance between the employer and the employer relationship. And I think that one of the things that we talk about is lifestyle, which is really important. I think now over the last 18 months, everyone's talking about. I mean, Stephen, you've been in Ireland for 3 months, right?
Yeah, that's right. So I was, I'm sort of a case and example of, so you can actually. So I've got an Irish and a British passport, so I've already done this. And a lot of clients, I've been saying, why don't you get an Irish passport? Brexit's happening. And that's a bit of what you said, Eric, they just didn't have the time. Whereas now when people are working from home, I get the inquiry back and go, okay, well, let's do the Irish passport. And then that gets them into Europe. And the great thing about the Irish passport is that, so free movement is still, in a sense, between Ireland and the UK, a common travel area. So the Irish passport probably is the best passport to have because it's you can work
for sure.
The UK.
In my business, you can work in the Holy Grail.
Yeah. So I would say the British passport used to be, when you say like what's the most, maybe like a Swiss passport, British passport. Whereas now the Irish passport is probably quite high up there as the one to have.
Because it still gives you access to the UK.
Yes.
But is it quite easy to get hold of an Irish passport?
So it's not like, so the great thing about the Irish passport is that you can go back to grandparents.
Okay.
So if you want British citizenship, as you know, you can only go back you can only go back one generation. So that gets you far. So that can get you back, we say like 75 years. So things that you hadn't really thought about, Granny was born in Cork, and maybe you thought it's just good to have a chat about it. Then all of a sudden it helps you big time because then you can live. Because Granny was born in Cork, you can have an Irish passport, which means you can live in Germany, and you have a job in Germany and, things like this. So the Irish passport has been huge for us, and I've got a little bit of affinity there as well, so that helps. But at the moment, like this is just from a personal perspective, and what I've heard from clients is that a lot of people with Irish passports are thinking about basing themselves in Ireland, and then it's an hour flight to London. So you could do 2 or 3 days in London. You can live in Ireland, and the good thing about Ireland is that the school, so you can still get what I would call a British education in Ireland, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So you got lots of like Chinese nationals coming across.
Trinity College. And all
Exactly.
sorts.
So a lot of the education system in Ireland is based on the British education, which is renowned for being, excellent. So you've got all these international families who would have maybe gone, oh, we have to go to a British school, where really you can go to an Irish school and get the same education. House prices are cheaper. Maybe if you had a school in London, it might be 30,000 a year. In Ireland, the equivalent education might be 10,000. So the houses are maybe 50% cheaper. So all of a sudden your costs are maybe halved. And all I need to do is get a flight or a radar flight to London, 100 quid. So a lot of people are thinking, base themselves in Ireland, you're based in the EU, but then you've got London. Because you can't, although Dublin's a great city, Belfast's good cities, there's nothing quite like London. So you can still have the London experience,
For sure.
but be in Ireland. And that's sort of, I think that's the flexibility people are looking for, from what I've seen.
Richard, I know you're bursting to come in on the education piece, so you come in.
Yeah, the one thing I would say is many people who tend to want a British education do tend to want the name schools.
Yes.
So they are aiming towards the Etons, the Wickham Abbeys, Westminsters, etc. So they want the ability to network on a global basis, particularly for the ultra high net worth families. And you may have Harrow, Dulwich, etc. in China, but they still want the original building. They still want, for example, if you're at Harrow in China, you will never be in Old Harrogate. So you need to be in the original school.
Yeah.
So a lot of these families, the frustration they found is they can't come and visit them. So travel restrictions have been the major element which has restricted everything. But they've been planning, I've got families talking to me about 2024, 2025, and further into the future. But so for particularly Chinese have gone a lot quieter there because they need a reason to leave China at the moment. And I've got a family actually coming over this summer, and the school had to issue a letter explaining why they're leaving China and why the parent is coming with the child. So you've got to sort of cross the border and have a reason for that. But in terms of that, I'm seeing a lot of expats, particularly from Hong Kong, looking to come back. And a lot of them attending, they may have historically had a house in London, but they're looking to move outside of London. So they're looking even slightly further afield than the historical commuting areas. So it can be Hampshire, it can be Dorset, it can be Oxfordshire, rather than Surrey, Kent, etc. So they tend to go, a lot of them saying we may work from home 1 day a week, but we still need to go into the office to a certain extent. But we've got a house in Clapham, for example, we're going to sell that and buy something in the countryside. So it's changing slightly in that scenario. But I'm seeing other areas, for example, Americans have been quite busy this year, particularly in financial services. So a number of them have actually said, we're now seeing opportunities here. A couple of weeks ago, I had a French gentleman who actually approached me saying, I left due to Brexit, but I'm now coming back. So what he said, everything which was the doom, as it were, of Brexit hasn't come to pass. So we're seeing slight differences there. But I think the Chinese will come back because, again, the Chinese want the original names, they want the networking. So, and that will be just a little bit further down the line. And also they've tended to come when the children are a little bit younger. So that means that rather than necessarily just coming for boarding at the age of 11, 13, some occasionally at 8, the parents are coming over with the children a little bit younger, say 5, 6, and getting into the good prep schools. Dragon School in Oxford is always very popular. But then you have the Papelwicks, but also in central London, the Wetherbys, etc. So you need those, and if you want a Wetherby place, generally you need to register on the day of birth. So again, it's that preparation which is key, and also they need to speak English. So again, different markets are understanding that some schools which they want, they may be an ultra high net family, their home country, that you may be able to get what you want because of who you are or how wealthy you are. But here it's about your child and what they have to offer. So, but even last week, I saw families from South Africa who are planning for 2024 and 2025, saying we're coming next year. So any geopolitical issues can have repercussions. So there, a lot of families are planning for the future, but there are actually elements are hastening their move to the UK, because I think vaccine confidence is definitely growing out there.
And I suppose, Michael, you're sort of uniquely placed over in Vietnam to sort of see trends and what's happening in the Far East. What kind of observations have you found in terms of, you know, the region that you're in and within your market as well?
Yeah, I mean, obviously we're more of an offshoot to you know, citizenship or residence planning. You know, we get involved a little bit afterwards. But yeah, I mean, in Vietnam in particular, I think that we've had inquiries where clients have turned around to us, or IFAs or individuals have turned around to us and said, well, look, you know, this particular person isn't going to be covered. They're looking at maybe a, you know, a Portugal or a Montenegro citizenship or residence scheme, and I think there's been a lot of clients just making sure that they're actually physically covered if they're going to be spending a lot more time in other countries. You know, as I say, we've had probably more US inquiries or inquiries from US nationals in the UK. You know, we've had so much more this year compared to the last, you know, 2 or 3 years. And I think a lot of that is potentially, you know, IHT planning as well. You know, if they are moving to the UK, a lot of them will be buying properties. And I think it's more forward planning in terms of, you know, potentially making that move. I mean, we've had to we've put in place, you know, non-face-to-face onboarding due to the pandemic. And that's really, really helped us. You know, we've seen, you know, a huge rise so far this year. We've actually outperformed in the first 6 months this year than we did last year. And again, you know, I think, you know, the panelists also pointed earlier to the fact that it's easier to get in front of people. Well, not actually physically get in front of people, but it's easier to have those conversations, and we're finding that as well. But again, you know, there's nothing like a global pandemic for people to be reviewing their life insurance policies.
Well, that's a very good point. Yeah, that's a very good point. And I suppose just sort of going back from the working from home idea and the kind of changes that's seen. Now, I know from my perspective, I've certainly seen a lot of examples where, yeah, there's people, maybe ultra high net worth individuals looking at the Caribbean. You know, Cayman Islands, for example, are trying to rebrand themselves from a place of business and perhaps a slightly shady past or slightly shady connotations to actually a really nice place with lovely beaches where you can, you know, get out your laptop and kind of crack on with your work there. But perhaps even a bit more closer to home, you know, we're facing a lot of, and I think Paul, you might have seen a bit of this as well. We're getting a lot of inquiries from employers even who are saying, well, you know, young Wolfgang decided to work from home back to Germany in March 2020, and he's still there. Is this a problem from a tax perspective?
Yes.
And yeah, I mean, you're probably getting that as well. And I think vice versa. So there's been an awful lot of work there, perhaps in looking back at what people have already done and sorting that out for them, both from the employee side and their tax obligations, their overseas tax obligations and their UK tax obligations, but also for the employer as well, sort of through PAYE. But then moving on from that, I'm seeing a lot of people who are saying, well, you know, I'm planning to move, okay, it might not necessarily be the Caribbean, but maybe I'm planning to move to Switzerland, or I'm planning to move somewhere else. But I still want to work for my employer in London, and the employer, I found certainly, has been increasingly relaxed about that and is like, yeah, sure, you know, off you go. Take your laptop with you. And again, it's, you know, well, hold on. There's some planning that needs to be involved from both perspectives. I don't know whether anyone here has sort of seen examples. I know, Stephen, you were just sort of
we've seen a lot of that, and I think that as immigration lawyers, we get asked the question, and I have to come to you and say, I think there's a tax issue. Well, what is it? You know, But because originally when it happened, I think that because we didn't think it was going to last for so long, then almost like sort of, line managers were just, it was sort of ad hoc. So people were saying, can I work from France? Yes, go ahead. Can I work from Germany? Go ahead. But the business never really made like a policy of what's our actual work from home policy. So there's lots of businesses need to do that. So it's almost like everyone needs to come back to work, and then there needs to be a policy and say, right, so COVID's over. So the reason that you're working remotely was because of COVID. Now what you're asking for is flexible working, which is totally different. So you need to in the same way, if you had childcare issues, you'd go to your employer and say, can I work 2 days a week from home? So now so it has to be formal. I think it has to be formalized. Because all these things did happen where people were just all over. There was people in my organization that were, all over the globe, and I didn't even know they were there because there was no policy. So I think a lot of firms now, and us as a law firm, we're putting a working from home policy in place, which you need proper permission. And what we think, what we're advising clients is, well, okay, it was a global pandemic, so things happened ad hoc, and people were given dispensations, but almost bring everyone back, start again, and then issue flexible working correctly through the employment contract.
Well, the problem is since Monday, when the working from home directive is now effectively gone.
Yes.
All employers are now having to review the policies in terms of, if you're working 2 or 3 days from home because you're self-isolated, or whether you want to make that permanent or whether it's a temporary measure.
Yes.
So if it's a temporary measure, it's still okay. You can approach it. But if you want it to be permanently, that you want to work 3 days from home or whatever it is, you now have to apply for a flexible policy.
Yes, exactly.
And it has to be written into your contract. Your contract then has to get changed, and all the rest that comes with it. A lot of people haven't realised you have to go through that process, and employers are going to get caught out on it, and so as employees. I think the other issue you need to be careful is where there's a number of employees working in a particular jurisdiction. You could create a permanent establishment in some way, shape, or form. If you've got the CEO, the board of directors all sitting in a different country. Yeah. So it does need some care and thought. And I don't think people have thought about that process at the moment, because they can get away saying it's because of COVID I couldn't get back into the country. It's okay. Yeah. There's attention. And importantly, on the US side, and I know there's a lot of people around who work on the US side, the US have these lifetime trusts, of which they're normally the settlor and the beneficiary. I've had at least 3 cases that I'm aware of at the moment where the trustee has come to the UK, got stuck here since last March, has now become a UK resident from a personal position, which is that's not so bad. But they made the trust UK resident because they're the only trustee. And they're not only trustees of their own trust, they're trustees of professional trustees on all other sort of trusts. And now there could be a whole list of trusts that effectively being brought on shore. Yeah. And then when this trustee then goes back to the US, you're exporting again. You've got another tax charge to worry about. And no one's picked this up. In a lot of cases, no one's picked this up. And some of these numbers are pretty big, pretty scary. Some of these numbers, because what they're going to have to report in the UK, because UK trusts are going to report all the income and take the UK tax on it. And our UK tax rate is obviously higher than the US in most places. So they're not going to get a full recovery in the US for it. But it's just these small things that are causing lots of problems, but people aren't aware of it. So when we do look at global mobility and people moving around, particularly the senior people, more important, I think getting advice early enough is probably a sensible option. I think you guys are at the front of it because you're probably doing that process at the beginning. But getting the planning wrong can be disastrous.
I had a very classic example. Some people just go overzealous with, the whole working from home and remote working environment. And we had a call from this very large corporate client saying we have this IT developer who really wants to work in 12 countries across Europe in the span of 1 year. I said, hang on a second, do you realize you need tax planning and you need immigration planning as well for these countries? Because you can't just walk in and start working in a country. He's working, he's not just visiting those countries. And they said, okay, that's fine, go ahead. So I said, hang on a second. You're looking at about 30,000, 40,000 pounds just in fees to give you advice if he can work in those countries or not. And then everything else is on top. And then they said, okay, that's too much money, we can't spend that kind of money. But you have employees who are wanting these things. And if you look at every country, say it's 3,000-4,000 per country to look at tax advice and immigration advice, it's a lot of work, it's not cheap. And then this guy said, okay, can we do 2 or 3 countries instead? So, you really have to strike a balance with your employees and make sure they understand, what remote working entails. It's not so fancy that you just keep going everywhere, work from the beach, because I blame the media and LinkedIn as well. It's all about hashtags and remote working and, beaches, and people think they have a pina colada at the beach, working there, on their laptop. But they don't realize when they go to Barbados or, these fancy locations, the rents will be so high because the demand's so high. They probably won't get a house because they have a visa for 6 months or whatever. Cost of living will be so expensive. The employer will have an issue for a PE in that country, tax issues, employment issues, immigration issues. So I think we need to take a step back and see, is it feasible? Is it really required?
It goes back to that policy idea, right?
Exactly. Yeah. So just
Establishing a policy.
Yeah. And having it for the whole firm.
Yeah.
Because what we found is that different line managers are making different decisions.
Yeah.
So if you've got like a really liberal line manager and maybe the line manager wants to work from Barbados.
Yeah.
It's like, oh yeah, all my team are Barbados, and then all of a sudden it gets self-fulfilling prophecy, isn't it? Whereas if you just have one policy that is led through, I don't know, HR, and you have to get proper approval and maybe give a month's notice and whatnot. Because we've had someone who went to Egypt when it was on the amber list, went on the red list, and then they asked whether the employer could pay for the hotel stay.
Yeah.
I was like, everything's pushed back to the employer. So I think when an employer says, yes, you can go and work in Egypt, the employee then feels like you're still responsible for them. So that person is stuck in Egypt because Egypt went from amber to red.
Yeah.
So they're going to have to stay 10 days in a hotel, and the employee's now saying the employer should pay for that. So again, it's a whole employment law problem, which then it's the fees. So the employment law fees are thousands of pounds. So it's the legal and the tax fees to sort it out become more than anything. So it's tough.
And I mean, I've seen examples of perhaps sort of the inverse of that, when someone wants to move and sort of say, well, I would like to work from home in whatever country it might be. And the employer will go, that's fine. I don't care how you do it. I don't really want to know how you do it. Don't involve me. But if you want to go off and do it and get your own advice, that's fine. And then they come to someone like me and kind of go, can you just sort the tax side out? And I'm like, well, it's not just sorting the personal tax side out. There's the payroll, and your employer is going to have to get involved in this. Because there's no other way of doing it. I mean, I think perhaps the way that all of this working from home and working from another country has come about has obviously not been ideal, and it's been prompted by the COVID pandemic. But I think sooner or later there's going to need to be some kind of concerted education campaign. And I guess we can all play our role in that. I'm not entirely sure how we would do that and be kind of coordinated in that sense. But I think altogether we are going to have to start educating both employees and employers that moving around is not just something you can click your fingers and
I think the bigger problem you can have is how you're going to be fair and equal to all your employees.
About it.
Because there's going to be some litigious cases in relation to this in terms of, well, you got to go to Barbados, you got to go to the island. How's that fair? And then who's picking up the tab for that? Who's picking up the cost of doing the additional payroll, or all the other bits that come with it? I think it's a recipe for disaster if the policy isn't right. And I think the difficulty at the moment is, as Raoul was saying, it's that open door policy at the moment. Go wherever you know, as long as you do your job, it's all right. But there's no one looking at the repercussions or the immigration issues or property issues, whatever it is, in education.
The mind and management.
The mind and management
consideration.
I think the younger staff are more overzealous right now, because people who are in the mid-level or the slightly senior level, they have mortgages, they have schools for their kids. They're more settled, they're like, okay, I don't mind working from Hampshire or Devon for a few weeks, and I'm happy. But the younger people, especially the people who are single with girlfriends and boyfriends, they are very, they just want to get out, okay, can you send me, I have staff in my office, like, can you send me this location and I'll just work from there forever? No, that's 8 hours behind you. Okay, how will you work? Sorry, do you expect me to be up at 2 o'clock in the night and monitor you? How do I do it? Sorry, I can't make it work.
I actually had families going back to the US and Moscow and having their kids homeschooled, but on UK time. So they were having to operate at very odd hours of the day. And because they've got houses in central London, they didn't necessarily have gardens. But if they lived in upstate New York, they had a lovely house with a great garden. But of course, they needed to be up at some ungodly hour so that the American school in London could teach them in British hours. So so it's not that easy when you've got to, but also parents have got to work, but they may be working from, say, the New York office, but they've also got to work with London time because that's where they're actually based.
Yeah, and there's always like a London or New York weighting, isn't there, on salary? So we get paid more because we work in London. So if we're going to work remotely from like Belfast or Glasgow, then like we're going to be like, you know, we're going to be very, very well paid because
no travel costs.
No travel costs. So, you know, I don't know whether then there's a discussion to say, okay, you can work from, I don't know, you can work from Manchester or Birmingham, but your salary was weighted 25% more because you worked in London. So then will people take a pay cut? So that might be a way of saying, okay, well, you can go, but and then there's a whole employment law issue.
People have had that conversation.
I was going to say, and I'm aware of, there's a few firms in New York, I think it's been in press as well, where they basically said that if you're not going to be working in New York, you are going to have to take a pay cut because, you know, if you're living at home, you don't have the same expenses. So it's, you know, there's no New York waiting. And I think that is a serious discussion that how does the employer even approach that with, you know, how does that work with a contract, or if it wasn't an issue written that you're getting New York waiting or London waiting, how does that work?
How do they calculate it? Well, if I've got a big house I live in, you know, out of London compared to living in zone 1, where I've got like a 10-minute commute, how do you value that? You have to calculate to work out what the cost of traveling, depending on what time you travel, what hours you do, right? It's a minefield.
It's so much time, isn't it? So with HR, with management, so much time would have to go into that. It'd be crippling, like hours and hours per employee, meeting after meeting, documenting it all, rewriting the contract.
To come back to the other point, it's actually easier for employees to tell employees to come back in 5 days a week.
The policy is no remote working, no mobility. Just.
And I realized listening to you all that working for a Standard Chartered with 90,000 employees, 70 countries where we have a physical presence, we seem to be quite ahead of the curve because I think it's 88% of us have moved to a hybrid working contract. So we've been through that process already. In terms of working abroad, we have a portal where we can officially submit requests. It goes through all the relevant departments, tax, immigration, everything to get it formalized. It is, depending on what kind of role, it's more complicated for somebody like me who advises clients, for example, because being UK regulated, I can't go and sit in the south of France and advise clients in the same way as I can do from London, and it takes everything into consideration. And it's not just an ad hoc kind of agreement just between line manager and an employee. But these are all very interesting topics. It's very interesting to listen to this.
No, well, maybe you can start a sideline in advising all the other professional practices how to do it properly.
What's been really interesting is that some of my private clients have been asking me about, because they have their own businesses, have been asking me how we've been adapting to the pandemic. We have an office in Wuhan, so we've been affected by this from day one. And the way we've yes. And so we've basically been rolling out globally what we've learned in the different locations, what works, what doesn't, in terms of like, at one point we had different kind of teams to ensure that if there were infections in one team, it wouldn't affect the business continuity, these kind of things. And we've tried different things out, and I think it's been an interesting experience for me to be sharing some of these best practices with my clients who, okay, I've got this business, I've got how are you guys managing this?
I mean, I think this is a story that's going to run and run, really, working from home. I mean, I think to an extent the genie's out the bottle now for everyone, isn't it? And it's you can't really put it back in again. But how we end up, and I'm sure things will settle down. I'm sure things will be quite bumpy for the next few years. But eventually, I suspect, give it 5 years time, things are gonna settle down. Maybe I'm being a bit optimistic then. I don't know.
You also remember coming into the office is quite valuable as well. I mean, for example,
it is.
When we were talking before we came into the room, we talked about this is probably some of the first sort of meeting in an office, and the protocols we have to do when we're having coffee, the protocols we have to do when we're having.
Do you shake hands?
Do you shake hands on the coffee? But let's all be fair. Sitting around the table having a discussion like this is much more productive than trying to do it on Teams.
Although people on
Sorry,
Teams.
well, it was a long trip for Michael to cover Vietnam.
Although I suppose the advent of Microsoft Teams and Zoom has been good in a way, because it has allowed someone like Michael based in Vietnam to kind of join these discussions. Much as I'm sure you love being here, you probably wouldn't have come to London especially for it. So it's good to have that opportunity for you to kind of bring your perspective sort of being in Vietnam.
Yeah, but I mean, just going back to you were talking about employees potentially being based overseas. What we've actually seen is that we've had an incredible amount of inquiries for UK corporate schemes where individuals have decided to move overseas and they're not then covered within the onshore corporate scheme. So things like that also have to be taken into consideration. If work staff are going to be based in different separate parts of the world, you have to make sure that the benefit package behind them is going to consist of if companies are offering life insurance, that it's actually going to work for them.
We were talking about earlier on, Michael. We talked about cases where people have moved from the UK and gone overseas, got a UK life insurance policy, tell me that they've got enough cover life insurance policy. And I said, well, you're not resident anymore in the UK. Have you checked your policy? Because it probably only covers you when you're a UK resident. So you're probably paying premiums where the policy is not even covering you.
Exactly.
And I've seen one case for 4 or 5 years that's been carried on until I said, well, where's your life policy? Let me have a look at it. And it didn't cover him when he was on UK resident. It only covered him while he was in the UK.
And a lot of the onshore policies in the UK will cover people overseas, but it's when you start working. It's as soon as you're earning an income overseas, that's when they'll turn around and say, guys, you're not covered anymore. And as you quite rightly say, we see case after case after case where individuals have been paying into life insurance policies for 5, 6, 7 years. Thankfully, nothing happened to them. There was no claims levied against the policies. But again, clients moving overseas, one of the first things that people should do is, look, am I covered? Have I got life insurance? Do I need it? Yes. Okay. Well, I'm not. Perhaps I need to review it and take an international life policy instead of an onshore one.
Mike, will it also apply to company policies? When a company got group policies, which are covering employees, and for example, I decide to go to Barbados, suddenly my life insurance policy may not cover me.
Exactly.
So I'm just conscious we've got just over 5 minutes left till the top of the hour. I just thought, we've obviously covered quite a lot of different topics, pretty much everything I had on my list, maybe in a slightly different order, but that's really great. Maybe the idea about whether people are looking to take citizenship by investment or residence by investment, that sort of thing. Maybe we can touch on that on another day. But I just wondered whether maybe just in conclusion, we go around the table again, just perhaps taking the opportunity maybe to look at your own market and perhaps get your sort of crystal ball out slightly in terms of what you're looking for in terms of trends for the future. Maybe what you've learned from the last 18 months or so, 16 months or so, and kind of wrap things up that way. Who do you want to start?
Stephen focuses on that side of the table.
Stephen, yeah, we'll go around again.
So I think, we didn't actually touch on it, but obviously for immigration to the UK, so European nationals need free movement, end of free movement. So we're doing lots of visas for European nationals that we never did before. So, and they'll need obviously tax plans as well. So Germans, French, it's the mindset of those nationals needing actual visas to come to the UK. So that's been huge. That will continue. It's a whole different market. And really, I just think it's the whole transition from COVID working from home to actually flexible working and getting that approved. I think that's going to be sort of the big 2 trends, really.
Great. Yeah. Chris, then.
I've really enjoyed listening to all of you around the table, and thank you for sharing your insights. I think there are some areas that in the year to come, which will be interesting. We spoke about the Asia to UK corridor. That's something that we can really help with as a bank, having a strong presence in Asia and being headquartered here in the UK. For my market specifically, I think London remains very much attractive for Middle Eastern clients. They miss coming to London like they would normally do, and I think there will be even more of them wanting to come and spend more time here, where they will need good advice from a structuring perspective, from an immigration perspective. They want to be spending time here, and we can help them with all the R&D setup and everything from a banking perspective and advising on the right kind of investments. So I think I think that trend is going to accelerate as we exit this pandemic. That's what I see ahead.
Brilliant. I think for us, COVID is more about forward planning and putting a wet finger in the air and say, I want this, I want that. So it's not concrete, but the real business for us is due to Brexit, because what we have realized is up until now, US, UK was the busiest corridor for immigration, but now EU is the biggest market because we need these engineers to come and work on projects in the UK or oil and gas projects in Shetland Islands or any North Sea. So what we have
They
seen,
need visas now.
they need visas and they need to come here because the projects are ongoing. They can't stop. So what we have seen in the last 7-8 months is that that's become so busy right now. Middle East is, there. America is there. Asia is there. But Europe is very, very busy. And I think that trend is going to remain. And I could potentially say for the next 10, 20 years, Brexit will help all of us get work from the EU. And our focus has suddenly shifted to the EU market now because we feel we need to focus on Spain, we need to focus on Germany, Netherlands, Luxembourg, because you have brokers moving between these two countries, you've got banking professionals, you've got oil and gas engineers. So,
makes sense.
It's the future.
And also, we've got to remember, London is still the financial centre.
Yeah.
There's lots of things that are good for London. It's the properties that we have in London, the sport, the entertainment, the culture. You can't buy culture. It's there. It's inherent. It'll be built. So the Far East still love coming to London. The Americans still love coming to London. So London will still always be a hub.
Yeah.
The question is now how we do business with Brexit going on. How we build that wall with the European partners, and that will happen over the next 12 to 18 months. But I see the property market still holding up fairly strong. We're still seeing some growth there, despite all the stamp duty and the inflation that brought in.
Yeah.
And we're still seeing a lot of investment into the UK from the Middle East and Africa, particularly in Africa. I'm seeing a lot of interest from Africa at the moment with clients having children moving to the UK. More importantly, a lot of them be sold structures going back 5 or 10 years, which aren't fit for purpose. So there's a lot of review of structures and looking at whether that actually makes sense to do that. Working with the likes of Michael, where we've got some Nigerian residents who now don't get the IHT benefit of having ownership of property through an offshore company, but now we can then look at life insurance to cover that, get rid of the structure, look at the life insurance to protect that. So we're seeing there's trends, but there's changing of trends as we go through the process. And we're going to have a bit of a tough time with having to repay COVID and the social care costs that are coming up. So we're going to see some tax increase now. What do they look like and how does that really affect the entrepreneurs, both in this country and the people that want to come?
Thankfully, British schools are often one of the major drivers for families to come to the UK. And in that regard, the quality is still there. Some of the fee-paying schools have performed exceptionally well during the pandemic, particularly with their remote learning. But I think, as Chris said, I think the Middle East could be quite interesting. I think particularly Saudis may be coming over here over the next few years. I've seen more demand from Brazil. In addition, the Chinese market is likely to come back. You've got that burgeoning middle class who can afford fee-paying schools and they want the school names. But also expats from Hong Kong. As one family said to me, before we were 12 hours away from our family in the UK. Now we're 16 months away.
Yeah.
So it's that detachment from their roots, which has really come to bear.
Interesting. Yeah, from my perspective, maybe putting two hats on the global investment migration space. As I said at the beginning, what's transformative in our industry is this awakening of the US market, as opposed to moving from California to Tampa or Florida for tax reasons, which they'll continue to do. And now they're starting to realize I could also have that plan B internationally if things go pear-shaped. So they finally understood that. So that's bringing them to looking at alternative citizenships and residency into Europe pathways. So that's, last I checked, still the country with the most millionaires on planet Earth. So if that's awakening, because I did 30 years of my career feeding off China, paying my mortgage and my daughter's education on the back of 1.2 billion citizens coming up the development curve. So if America is seeing the value of a Portuguese golden visa, they've certainly seen ancestral value. They've all applied for it into Ireland or Portugal or Italy, wherever they had it, they've grabbed it. We saw that in the last 2 years in particular. But those who don't have it are calling us. So that's one macro thing, which we're really, really excited about tapping into. But because I'm here in the UK and we have a presence in an office here, I agree with what was said about London. It's still London, and it's still a drive. The educational system is the motivation and the key to obviously Asia, but we just brought in 2 families from Nigeria. It was all about the schools, right? It's all about the schools. So next, is it 2 million tier 1 that we could plunk in standard charter maybe, or is it going to be an innovator visa that allows them to be active? All that is very interesting. So the UK, I think, despite whatever Brexit brings, is still very much about London when it comes to that, and the educational system and the cultural epicenter that it is. So very bullish still on the UK side as well.
Yeah. Michael?
Yeah, I think what's seen ourselves have a very positive last 18 months is the fact that we've been able to implement non-face-to-face onboarding processes. I think going forward, obviously, I think the pending asset transfer from the baby boomer generation to the next generation, whenever there's an asset transfer, it's always going to trigger some sort of taxation. So, over the course of the next 18 months, 2 years, 5 years, that's where I see us actually, performing quite well. But also around UK inheritance tax for people that are moving into the UK, if they're purchasing property, we can actually cover any nationality as long as they're in a country that we can accept them on risk. So any nationality that that's moving into the UK, buying UK properties, Rakesh mentioned Nigerians before, we've got no issue with that. So that's where I think that we're going to benefit over the course of the next 18 months. But also in Europe, has also been touched on, a lot of UK insurers, especially the Lloyd's market, they can't actually write business in Europe anymore. So we've actually benefited hugely from that. And I think that's obviously going to continue too.
Thanks. And Paul, from a US perspective? You're mute.
First one of the day.
Yeah, that's why everything's going to change. People on mute too often. The last 18 months have obviously been challenging for everyone. I think everyone accepts it's brought forward the pace of change and acceptance of remote working. But obviously, that being said, we are still seeing a lot of US nationals coming to the UK. And as the rest of the panel have already mentioned, London is still a very attractive proposition. And, with the constant tinkering of both the UK and US tax legislation, and in particular with President Biden's tax proposals, if they come to light, we can see this trend continuing, and people, a lot of US citizens still moving over to the UK, in particular over the next few years.
Yeah, no, I think that's certainly right. I mean, I think from a UK perspective, the challenge of remote working, which we've spoken about, I think will definitely present further challenges in the future, particularly when the UK tax authorities, for example, start actually looking into what people have been doing during the 2021 tax year, for example. I think that's going to raise some challenges and some opportunities there, and also educating employees and employers. But then from a perspective of people coming to permanently settle in the UK, pre-arrival tax planning, that is still as important as it's always been. The same issues there, remittance basis, pre-arrival planning, sorting out bank accounts before you come to the UK. I think when people can start to move again a bit more freely than they've been able to, there will probably be a lot of activity in that market as people suddenly find the ability to start traveling. Let's hope that that's going to be sooner rather than later.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of pent-up demand there.
Exactly. Well, I've really enjoyed this our discussion over the last hour or so, and thank you all very much again for joining us, both here and remotely as well. Hopefully, this will be the first of many global mobility roundtables. I know Rakesh has really done quite a few on the family office side. So I'm going to be following in his great footsteps on the global mobility front as well. But yeah, I think thank you again, we'll draw a halt to formal proceedings here, I think.
Thank you very
Okay.
much.
Thanks. Take care. Safe journey home, everybody.
Yes.
Thank you.